Hi, everyone. I'm excited to have you here today. I'm going to be introducing you to a video series where I will be interviewing the various medical professionals and researchers involved with a nonprofit that I've been working with. It's called the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices, and you can find it at BenzoReformorg. Today, to kind of help introduce this to you, I have the founder, Bernie Silvernail. So Bernie, after receiving his master's degree at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Bernie Silvernail was among the first wave of engineers to work on microprocessor architecture. This led to a series of program and line management positions. Several years ago, Bernie was exposed to the problems with benzodiazepines, and he made it his mission to reduce the damage caused by these drugs. So welcome, Bernie.
Hi, Jocelyn, and hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on this series.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we finally get to do this because the Alliance has kind of been out there doing good things for a while, but people aren't really that familiar with it. So I'm glad that we finally get to do this. Bernie, really the first time and the last time that I met you in person was at the International Benzodiazepine Symposium in Bend, Oregon. And really that continuing medical education program that doctors attended was really the genesis for the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices, right? I remember seeing you there. I was there presenting as part of a patient panel, and I remember seeing this gentleman get up with his wife and say, "We need to do something about this. We have to do something." And I was thinking, well, I mean, we're trying. There have been so many members of the community who have, we've put together websites, and some of us got together and we started the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, another nonprofit. And there was obviously a lot that needed to be done, but we were kind of stretched as far as what I feel like we could accomplish as benzo survivors. And so tell us why is the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices needed? What niche is it kind of filling, and how is it doing that?
Well, I should start by talking about how I got motivated to go to the same conference you just mentioned. It was due to my wife being a long-time benzodiazepine sufferer, several years of tapering off of benzos, and now several years since that. So she's still in the recovery phase of that. And she had finished her taper by the time that we attended this conference. And yet it's such a long road to recovery for some people.
Oh, yeah.
And this is once we both became familiar with this problem, we did a lot of research, and thank goodness we have all the tools available to us now. And we discovered that, gee, this is actually a fairly well-known problem, that long-term use of benzodiazepines often leads to dependence. And we were just fortunate enough that in our own neighborhood, this conference was taking place. So we both went to find out what the state of the art was, and who are the experts, who are the people that are talking about this and are trying to do something about it. Of course, we were familiar with the online resources previously, notably BenzoBuddies and BIC, because they're both really good resources. And but we wanted to be a part of the solution somehow. So we attended that conference. And while you were on the patient panel and answering questions, Jocelyn, I was making contacts with all of the people who were the experts there, notably Robert Whitaker from Mad in America, and Bob Rafa from NEMA Research, and of course Stephen Wright, Dr. Stephen Wright, who is now our medical director, who was the medical director of the conference, who put he and Marjorie put the whole conference together. So that was the genesis of this, and the need was based on personal experience and observation of lots of people suffering. So that's how we got started.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where all of us start. I think we see this kind of suffering going on, and I know watching your wife go through that, and we're actually going to interview Carrie as part of this series. so people get to hear her story. But you know, I'm kind of seeing it from the perspective of somebody who was going through it. But as the loved one of somebody who had to go through this, I mean, what were your thoughts when this happened to Carrie? Were you thinking that she had come down with some kind of horrible illness at first, or that she had just gone insane, or what was your thought process as you first, you know, embarked on this journey with your wife?
Well, Carrie's a registered nurse, so she's the one that in our family, we have 2 kids, in our whole family history, she's been the one to sort of diagnose and take care of everybody.
Hmm.
And she was trying to diagnose herself with this, and there was such a myriad of weird symptoms that it was really hard.
Yeah.
Finally, to be honest, she found the right collection of search terms on the internet, and bang, benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome popped up. I remember she read it and called me over, and we just looked at it, and we both said, "Oh shit, that's just the way it is." You know, we got caught in this trap. So it was, and then of course we both read like crazy after we discovered that, and discovered that for some people it can be pretty darn awful. For others, it's a short trip and they come out quickly with not many lingering sequelae. So we didn't know what we were in for, just like nobody does when they discover that the weird symptoms that they're experiencing are actually caused by this.
Hmm.
The really discouraging thing, I have to mention this, was that we visited a bunch of different prescribers, different clinicians, including our primary care physician and others. And we had the same experience so many people talk about online, is that their doctors just don't know. Our doctors didn't know. And it wasn't until after we were certain we understood what it was, we were able to convince a naturopath to take a serious look at it. And they came back to us and said, yes, we agree with you. That's exactly what's going on with you. But it's not well known, not only in the consumer community, but among medical care providers. And that's actually why I became interested in helping set up some kind of an organization to deal with this.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, at the conference, you were able to make some really great connections with medical professionals and people who I began to understand, as I heard them talk about this problem, knew how to navigate this in a way that I really hadn't seen before. You know, as patients, as lay people, we don't exactly know how to accomplish some of these goals when it comes to changing the way that things work within the medical profession, or with the FDA. So some of the people I know that you mentioned, like Bob Raffa, Steve Fry, Joe Pergolesi, we've got Anna Lemke coming up for an interview, and I'm really excited about these because I think there's gonna be a lot of information presented that people haven't heard before, a lot of exciting things that the Alliance is doing. So could you just give us kind of an overview of what some of the goals of the Alliance are?
Unlike most other organizations, we're actually we target our activities at trying to stop the number of people who are falling into the benzodiazepine trap.
Right. So before
Uh,
they're ever even prescribed a benzodiazepine.
right,
Right.
right, exactly.
Yeah,
And
because we have no idea who's going to be the one who's going to be injured. I mean, that's really the problem, right? You could
right,
be on these for
exactly.
years and be totally fine, and or you could be
Yes.
like Carrie, short term, and be totally completely injured. So
Right, and the problem is of course, there's no diagnostic procedure to differentiate between those two classes of
mhm,
individuals.
mhm.
The underlying mechanism for becoming dependent versus not being affected by it is not known. The science just doesn't tell us that. And so our focus is really at trying to pass those messages on to prescribers primarily, and to get them to look at their prescriptive practice so they understand that there's a significant risk that part of their patient population is going to wind up dependent on these drugs. So how do you do that? How do you take the 300,000 prescribers we have in the United States and get them to look at new evidence, to consider a new way of thinking? These drugs have been around for 60 years, and the general perception among prescribers is that they're safe and effective. We don't have a problem. What are you talking about? Well, there's a lot of data, a lot of published material that is published in reputable scientific journals that that shows there really is a problem. And it's interesting. Even the some of the documents that were submitted to the FDA to get approval of some of these drugs, especially alprazolam, which is Xanax, clearly indicate a dependence problem.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and yet these drugs were approved.
Right.
So it's a problem, as it is with other classes of psychoactive drugs, that they perform a miracle when they're first administered. Like, for example, somebody with a panic attack who is administered a benzodiazepine, it typically will take down that panic attack.
Right.
The problem comes with repeat use of the drugs and repeat prescriptions in particular.
Yeah.
Uh,
And we'll probably go into that more with some of the other
medical.
interviews that I do. But how is the Alliance going to change that? How are we going to get doctors to actually listen to us? Because, I mean, quite frankly, BIC has done a wonderful job, the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, of really doing outreach and doing education, educating the public. And we work kind of hand in hand with them a lot of times to do that. But as far as the Alliance, we're kind of definitely, like you said, more doctor focused, right? We're not just about getting information. We're about actually influencing prescribers.
Okay, so we have two separate approaches that we're doing here. Two main prongs. One of them is to work with to try to directly influence prescriber behavior. And the second one is to actually provide better information for patients also. So we're not ignoring the people who are suffering, but on the other hand, the bulk of our effort is to try to reduce the number of people who are falling into this trap, as I said before. So I could talk about the specific programs we have. Would you like to hear that?
Yeah, I think so, because I think people really
Okay.
want to know how are you going to get things to change after 60 years? Because nothing has changed, quite frankly.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've developed an extensive plan that has, well, 35 deliverables now that we're working on, about half of them in parallel. One of the key things we need to do is to influence a substantial number of prescribers, is to come in from the top down to the prescriber's domain. The key influencers of prescriber behavior are typically the FDA and the DEA and state medical boards. So we have programs that target all three of those different agencies. And I mentioned 35 deliverables. So some of these are useful for one agency, some are useful for the other, and some span across the other agencies. So we have developed a team of medical professionals and researchers who are working on collating the evidence that's already out there in published reports, and in doing some original research. For example, we have a program with the University of Arizona where they're doing an original research project for us. That's finished the data collection stage now. They're in the process of writing the paper on it. It was an animal study on benzodiazepine addiction, as they term it, but we know it's dependence and withdrawal, and the sequelae to that, which includes a longer period than anybody expected for recovery. So that's an example of one of the programs we have.
Yeah, and that's exciting to me as somebody who's been through this, because there really isn't a lot of great, I would say, research out there on what do these drugs actually do to our bodies. And that's a big part of the problem, because when you try and explain this to your loved ones or to a provider, they have no data. They have no idea what these drugs do to us after being on them for 4 to 6 weeks, you know?
Yes.
So
So there's a collection of well, depending on where you get your numbers, anywhere from 130 to 140 different symptoms that have been associated with this withdrawal syndrome. I think the key focus that we have in terms of trying to restrict the number of new prescriptions is targeted at making both providers and the regulators aware that this massive number of symptoms exist, and they're often confused with other diagnoses, and misdiagnoses are rampant. And so there are lots of scientific papers that talk about this phenomena, how easy it is to misdiagnose things. And one of the roles of the Alliance is to comb through all of that literature and pull out the common themes in them and collate it into new papers that get published. And we're not talking about things that go into Psychology Today or popular magazines. This is primary evidence that will show up when you do a primary literature search, because that is what these agencies that I mentioned, that's what they pay attention to. And so we're trying to provide up-to-date evidence that's in the domain that they look at. Our intention is to take all of that evidence and then approach them for the changes that we seek. But that won't happen this year because we are still working on building the foundation. We've been in operation for about 1.5 years now, and we do have the organization in place, and we have all these projects being done in parallel, but only a few papers have been fully completed and published. But we have lots of other ones that are in process right now.
yeah, and I mean, you say only a few papers, but to me, that's huge progress. It's more than what's happened in the past. And I know that another one of the initiatives or the deliverables that the Alliance works on is to go around the country and do presentations. We have Steve Wright and Bob Rafa, and is it Joe that is the other one that does the presentations, or?
Joe does, and we also have Reed Finlinson and Arwen Podesta, two other members of the Alliance who have given presentations on their own. There are a couple of, so we call them, and we have others who will do presentations, but we just call them affiliates. So far, we've delivered over 20 of these continuing medical education programs. Yeah. The prescribers actually get credit for doing this, and they have to take classes. So this fulfills a requirement for prescribers, and at the same time, it gets our message out. We've had as many as 250 prescribers at a given conference. So while
that's huge. That's huge. I mean, the number of people that even just a handful of prescribers can impact, who had no understanding of this before, because let's face it, most don't. Most have no understanding of this.
Sadly, that's true. Yeah. So that's one of our efforts is we call that the bottoms-up education approach, because we'll be impacting significant numbers of prescribers, but when you look across a target audience of 300,000, it's not enough to change the needle as much as we need it to. So that's why we have these other programs in place.
And honestly, that's a good thing about having a businessman such as yourself head up an organization like this, because you know how to get stuff done. I mean, really, you know how to organize this, and I've been really impressed with how you've led this whole initiative. Obviously, with the advice of these medical experts and people who understand the field itself. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. Are there any other parts of the what the Alliance is doing that you wanted to discuss? And of course, anytime there is one of these continuing medical education conferences, it's on the website at BenzoReform.org. If people want their doctors to become educated or encourage any medical providers that you know to attend these, can they find out about them on the website ahead of time?
Yes, we list most of the active programs we have on the website. There are still a few that are not listed. And by the way, we're in the middle of a major revamp of the website. So that should be coming within the next few weeks. But I did want to mention a couple of others that we have going. we've had a team of 12 MDs and researchers working on developing a book about benzodiazepines. This is probably going to be, I'm not sure what the final page count is, but it's somewhere in the 200 to 300 page zone. So it's not a lightweight thing. It'll be the most thorough compendium of information on benzodiazepines ever collected. And that was accepted for publication, excitingly, by Oxford University Press.
Wow.
So, which is like the premier place to get medical or scientific books published. They've accepted this. They've received the draft version. It's completely written, and they've given us their first round of feedback. We've responded with the second drafts of these already. So it's in process, and we're looking forward to its being published, hopefully sometime in Q2. The exciting part about this book is that it's being written by benzo-aware doctors. So the whole thing, while it is what benzos are all about, from pharmacology all the way to clinical practice, but it's with benzo awareness as part of it. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah.
We hope that will become the reference standard. It's not meant to replace the Ashton manual, because it doesn't have all the detail that the Ashton manual does. In like, for example, it doesn't list all of the same drugs that the Ashton manual does. But I think it probably covers everything that's in the Ashton manual, plus much, much more.
Right. And so hopefully, my understanding is this will basically be the physician's benzodiazepine Bible, as it were.
That's what our hope is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have that in process. We also have plans to go both at a federal and a state level to try to get regulations changed. And one of the other things that's a program that's in the wings, we're not active on this yet because we're building the evidence base before we approach it, is most doctors, once they've been educated, once they come out of medical school and they're in active process or active practice, they fall into a routine, just like everybody does in their professional life. They find out what works and they just do it. So docs that have been prescribing for 15, 20 years, they have a regular set of practice. If they're uncertain about anything, they typically now, in today's age, consult a system called a clinical decision support system. And then there are a whole bunch of these that have been commercialized. So if they have a question,
you're talking about like websites. Sorry, you're talking about websites or manuals, or?
Yeah, no, they're websites, they're online resources, and so a typical doctor's office will have one of these things cracked open at all the time. And if a patient comes in questioning medications and makes some kind of assertion, or if a doc is uncertain, say a patient talks to them and then afterwards the doc says, well, I'm going to check that out. What they'll do is look at one of these clinical decision support systems and read about the drug of concern. So these have tremendous influence over prescriptive practice. So one of our goals is to take this compendium of evidence that we're gathering and the book and all these other things, and approach the makers of these systems and get them to change how they write about benzodiazepines, because we've looked at them and almost universally they don't deal with the problem of long-term use. They mention it, but they don't really deal with it. And they certainly don't deal with the how to taper people off benzodiazepines and how to support them afterwards in the way that it needs to be done specifically for benzos.
Yeah,
that's
kind of sad when you think about it, that the go-to info that doctors have at their fingertips it does not have the best up-to-date information about benzodiazepines. And as a patient, Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was just going to agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because, you always hear doctors kind of say, don't go to Dr. Google. And it's like, you guys Google it too. You just have, you just
Yeah,
have
that's a,
specific sites you go to.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, theirs have the specific names that they trust,
yeah,
and so you understand.
yeah.
Well, there is a lot of misinformation available on the web, so I can
Oh,
understand
yeah.
how they
Yeah.
evolved to that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, in
I,
fact, one of the things I often say about people within the benzodiazepine community is there's so much information. It's like we have just enough information to really hurt ourselves because there's just so much, and that's why we need these physicians to help guide us through this. And yet, there's such a blight of any available medical professionals who really are capable of helping patients get through this. So again,
yeah,
I find this very exciting. I know a lot of it's like business talk and
yeah.
whatever, but to me, this is very exciting. All of these things because they really indicate some really big change on the horizon.
Well, we get a lot of people who contact us on the website who are having difficulty finding prescribers who know what's going on,
Mm.
and it's particularly who are willing or capable to help with the taper and withdrawal process. So that's an area where we have an effort going that's really focused on our website. We have a set of tools that we've defined, and the first one's already deployed there, that help patients bring their prescriber over to their side. The first one that's on the website is called the Prescriber Information Pamphlet, and there's a communication guide associated with it. Between these two, the idea is they're tools targeted for the patients to understand what's happening with them, but from the mission of the alliance, from the viewpoint of that, we intend for these tools to be taken to, at least the pamphlets, to be taken actually to the doctors and presented to the doctors, because most of them just don't know. They just don't think there's a problem. And these are safe and effective from their viewpoint.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is, and we've defined a whole new set of these. Ultimately, we expect there'll be 12 of these things. And they're intended for patients to take to their doctors to win the doctor over to their side, and at the same time to convert the doctors to being benzo-wise.
Yeah.
So two things at once. And we're pretty excited about these because it's actually not an easy job to do this, because you're stepping in, you're a layperson stepping into a prescriber's domain, an area where they're used to being the authority and having the respect and the knowledge, and you're having to go in there and say, you have the authority, respect, and knowledge, but there's a possibility you may not be aware of this thing, and I really need your help. So that's how these tools are set up, and we're pretty excited that this will help patients directly too, not
Yeah.
just
Yeah, and this
not
is
the
something that was
flow.
written by somebody who is an expert in this kind of communication.
Right, right,
We really do seek out the best people in each of these sort of
yes.
deliverables that you've mentioned. I know I've already directed people to that resource. I think
Okay.
because what you're addressing there is really one of the most precarious parts in getting off of benzodiazepines is communicating that to your doctor. And I see it far too often that people do that, they try, they kind of fail, and then all of a sudden they're without a provider. um,
Yes.
and then they're really in a bad place. So
Yeah.
it is kind of almost, there's like even a script there for people to follow, because it's hard to, like you said, it's hard to know what to say, and honestly when your brain's not working right, then it's
Yes.
really hard to know what to say.
Yeah.
So this is like a very step-by-step guide to help people, and that is great. It's really exciting.
Okay, just one more thing on that before I let it go.
Yeah.
The one that's on the website now is a 2-page thing, and it's pretty complex, to be honest. It's a lot for both the patients and the prescribers to digest. So we have developed a plan, and we partitioned this out into 12 separate things. Now, we may not need all 12, but we kind of went the other direction to help it make it more understandable. And to be honest, the first one is probably the most critical, which is getting the prescriber to understand that there may be a problem here because they just don't think there is.
Yeah, yeah. So as we go forward with this, is there anything about the work that you've been doing, that you've been involved with, or with your wife, and watching her go through this process, that gives you hope for the future of this whole benzodiazepine cause in general?
Well, we see increasing awareness. That certainly helps. Like the Lisa Ling special that was on recently. Yeah, and then there was a short thing. It was a while ago on NBC News, just a couple of minutes. Just little things. And I see more and more articles about this in the
Hmm.
medical press. So, and it's increasingly being tied to the opioid crisis, which has $4 billion worth of funding and lots of media and attention. Well, benzodiazepines are extremely strongly tied to that. They're the number one most co-prescribed drug along with opioids, and they're the number one most implicated in deaths associated with opioids. So there's a connection there. We're, as an organization, we're making sure that that connection is emphasized because that gets attention. And ultimately, for us to have much of an impact on the Alliance, through the Alliance, we need to get that attention, and we need to get fundraising. Because we're a volunteer run group and supported by donations. So we're seeking federal money, we're seeking grants, but at this point, we're largely sustained by donations from private individuals. $10 here, $100 there. That's what keeps our research efforts going. Our entire board of directors and all of our advisors are voluntary. Nobody gets paid for anything they do here, and that's hard to get medical professionals to volunteer their time, but we're doing that, and we're committed to making a difference here. So if any of you hearing this can help, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. We'll try and start setting up some fundraisers, especially on Facebook, things like that. A lot of people will, I know, be excited about even just contributing a little bit. And I think what's also really what gives me hope, right, and really is heartening to see, is when you have a loved one such as yourself who watches someone go through this, and really steps up to the plate and says, "I'm going to do something about this," because far too often we see quite the opposite. We see so many people who are alienated from their friends and family, who have spouses who leave them or divorce them because they're like, I didn't sign up for this. um, and unfortunately not everybody has the means and the resources, and the ability to take this on in a way that you have, Bernie, but you really have. And so I would encourage everybody, go to BenzoReform.org, support it in any way that you can. I'll post some links down below this. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today. And I just wanted to leave you a little time if there's anything else that I missed that you wanted to address or anything like that.
I think you've covered it pretty well. I do want to mention that on the website there's a spot you can volunteer too. So it's not, we're not just asking for money. If there's a way, even by sharing your experience, that you can help, because we are collecting stories that if they're done in sufficient level of detail, and let's say you've kept records of what's happened to you in particular, we can turn these things, in your stories, into scientific journal articles. But they have to meet certain requirements to do that. And unfortunately, most people who have gone through this hell don't spend their time writing down the details of what they've gone through. So so that's one way you can help, and we appreciate any kind of help. So and even just following us is a good thing. Just tell others. That's a wonderful thing.
Great. So yeah, case studies, things like that are always useful in the literature. And then of course, oftentimes one of the really valuable parts of these presentations is the patient portion. So you'll have the doctors and the researchers who will get up and do the presentation, but really what often changes hearts and minds is those patient stories. And so if they're presenting in your state, wherever they may be, keep in touch, keep abreast of what's going on, because we may be looking for patients who can attend these things and give their version of their story.
Right.
Yeah, so definitely so many things going on. Very exciting. We'll look for the lovely, bright, and beautiful new website as it emerges. Um,
All right.
all right, and for
Well,
that book, yeah.
thank you very much for doing this series, Jocelyn, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bernie. We'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.